You are listening to Book Clips, a mini podcast in which authors or narrators do readings from novels. Check out the show notes for the synopsis and buy links for this book.
Darkness Remains, sequel to Darkness Falls. Written by K.C. Luck. Narrated by Violet Dixon. Chapter 1. The smells of hay, horses, and leather were some of Sam Quinn's favorite scents in the world. She felt at home as she walked into the Oregon State University's Horse Center. Some of the majestic animals were already missing from their stalls, and she wondered how many of her veterinary studies peers had the same idea she did. It was time to get out of Corvallis, and horseback was a smart way to travel. Following a super solar storm, the power had been off for a week. Although all normal channels were out, a friend in the communications department confirmed a few transmissions had been received over the university's shortwave radio network. The news was grim. A planet-wide blackout, with no end in sight, had set the world back 100 years. All modern conveniences that relied on electricity were rendered useless. Societal collapse was already in motion, particularly in the larger cities. For Sam, this meant it was an excellent time to bug out. And with vehicles quickly becoming useless without access to fuel, she planned to go by horse. Luckily, she had one available. Or at least she sort of did. Lester, a 10-year-old quarter horse, was actually owned by the university. However, he had been assigned to her when she was a freshman, as part of her vet studies. Now, 4 years later, the beast was her best friend. There was no way she was leaving him behind. Sam turned down the row of stalls where Lester spent his time when she was not working with him, and saw his sizable brown head poking out over the gate. If she didn't know better, she would say he had been waiting for her to show up. Sam grinned as Lester tossed his head with a nicker of hello. "Good to see you too, buddy," Sam said, reaching him and running a loving hand down his cheek. "Ready for a little adventure?" Lester nuzzled her neck in response, and she chuckled. "I figured as much." Just as she began to open the door to his stall, she heard footsteps on the concrete floor behind her. "Hello, Samantha," said a man's voice. Sam turned to see Ben Wilson, the barn manager, walking toward her. Even though he was a good man, and Sam had great respect for him, he was the last person she wanted to see. Her mouth went dry as she considered her options. "Hello, Mr. Wilson," she said, waiting to hear what else he had to say. Considering she had a full backpack on her shoulders and a .22 rifle at her side, there was no sense in trying to explain the obvious. He came to stand beside her. When Lester turned to him, the man touched the horse with affection. "Taking Lester out for some exercise?" he said, not looking at Sam. Sam swallowed. "Yes, sir," she said softly. The two of them stood quietly for a minute, while Mr. Wilson stroked Lester's muzzle. Finally, he turned to her. She saw a look of sadness in his eyes. "Good," he said. "He needs the attention. Just be careful, okay?" he said. Sam nodded. She could feel the waves of resignation coming off of the man. "Everything okay, Mr. Wilson?" she asked. "I mean, under the circumstances?" The man let his eyes drift to the floor, rubbing the toe of his boot at a faint spot of dirt, before letting out a long sigh. "My wife is diabetic, since she was a baby," he said softly. Sam felt her stomach sink. Without power, the insulin, he shrugged. And Sam did not know what to say. There will be a lot of this in the days ahead, she thought. As medications run out, all the more reason to stay clear of people. As if reading her thoughts, Mr. Wilson lifted his eyes and looked hard into hers. "Which direction are you going?" he asked. "West first," Sam answered. "Then north, up the coast into Canada, probably. I have family in Alaska." Mr. Wilson raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a distance," he said. Sam nodded. "It is, but I'm in no rush," she said, and it was true. Sam was 26, had no possessions but what was in her backpack. She had no agenda and no real destination. As if satisfied with her answer, Mr. Wilson looked away again and stared at the floor. The silence grew long, and finally, Sam cleared her throat. "Well, sir, I think I'll get Lester saddled up and head out." The statement seemed to snap Mr. Wilson back to the present, and he blinked. "Right," he said. "Of course." He clapped a hand on Sam's shoulder. "Be safe," he said, and walked away. Sam watched him leave for a moment, and then turned to Lester to get busy. It was time to go. Taking in the sight of the dozens of fire-damaged buildings, Taylor Barnes drove the Honda Pilot through the ruined neighborhood. When the city's hospital caught fire, and then exploded as the flames found the oxygen tanks, the fire had spread into the nearby community. Only a heavy Oregon rain shower had stopped the disaster from wiping out the entire city. Now, however, the 20 blocks impacted looked similar to war zones, which Taylor had seen when she was a military police officer in the Army. "I had no idea," Jackie Scott breathed from beside her in the passenger seat. Instinctively, Taylor took the beautiful woman's hand, squeezing it gently. "Are you sure you still want to help with this?" she asked. "Anna will be over at the high school working with patients. They always need volunteers there." Jackie shook her head. "No," she said. "I want to be here to help Andre and Ramona." Taylor glanced over at Jackie and smiled. She knew the woman she loved was well out of her comfort zone. After a career of kicking ass in boardrooms for a prominent designer magazine in Seattle, the idea that she was about to sift through the ashes of ruined buildings to help her new friends was admirable. "They appreciate it," Taylor said, stopping behind the truck pulling over in front of her. She watched Jackie's sister, Lexi Scott, climb out of the driver's side while her friend Andre slid out of the other. Turning off the engine, Taylor looked at Jackie. "You're gonna get dirty," she said, with a playful smile. Jackie rolled her eyes. "I can handle it," she said, starting to pull her hand away from Taylor's. Taylor held tight. "You'll need a shower afterward," she said, her voice intentionally husky. Now Jackie tilted her head as she took in Taylor's look. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, letting her eyes turn sultry. Taylor felt a bloom of heat start low in her belly. Damn, this woman is trouble, she thought. Even though they slept wrapped in each other's arms every night, she had yet to make love to her. But I'll wait as long as it takes. No doubt seeing Taylor's hungry look, Jackie blushed and then successfully pulled her hand away as she opened the car door. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Taylor Barnes," she said, and got out. Taylor sighed as she opened her own door. The woman was right, but in her heart, she would not change it for the world. Laura Kennedy walked down the sidewalk and tried to keep from crying. Why does she have to be so awful? Laura thought, as she remembered her sister-in-law's harsh words over their meager breakfast of oatmeal that morning. It's not like I want to live there. Still, the other woman all but accused Laura of taking the food out of her children's mouths. The problem was, Laura had no other choice but to stay with them. When the hospital fire ravished her neighborhood, the old bungalow she lovingly brought back to life and furnished with her mother's antiques burned. Almost everything Laura owned was consumed by the flames. All she had been able to do was stand back and watch. No fireman had come, and the bucket brigade which formed, as heroic as they were, was only able to do so much. Only the rain kept the entire lot from turning into nothing but ash. But close to it, she thought, turning the corner and wandering to where her house had once stood. She stopped and looked at the few remaining blackened walls. The roof had collapsed. Most of the building had fallen inward, no doubt making the site hazardous. But Laura did not care. She had been waiting for the rain to stop so she could come and sort through whatever was left. Finally, today the sun was out. Nothing would prevent her from searching now. Looking around, she saw a lot of families had the same idea. Cars and trucks lined the block. Grim-faced people moved with shovels and crowbars through the ruined structures. Tears threatened again as she watched the despair on so many faces. Knowing hers looked the same, she brushed a long blonde lock of hair out of her face while focusing on the task ahead. Seeing the front door was gone, Laura walked around the side of the house. She found an opening where a wall used to be, and she stopped to look into the living room. Black mud covered the once polished wood floors, and only one corner of her prized wool rug shone through. Suddenly, Laura just wanted to turn around and leave. Doing the task alone would be too hard, and being a loner by nature, she had no one to ask for help. It's hopeless, she thought, and sank down on her knees. She didn't care that the ash was staining the two big jeans she borrowed from her sister-in-law. She covered her face with her hands, letting the tears come at last. For a week, she had stayed strong. First the power went out, then her home burned, and she had to move in with her brother's horrible family. But now, this overwhelming and possibly useless task was too much to bear. The sobs came hard and shook her body. It was all she could do to not just lay down in a ball in the mud and die. "Laura?" a woman's voice said from beside her, and then she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Laura almost laughed. The question was so ludicrous. Of course she was not all right. She was kneeling in the mud while crying her heart out and wishing she was dead. Still, she took her hands away and looked to see who was beside her. A woman had knelt down in the ashes with her. The sun was behind the woman, so her face was in shadow. Laura could not see her expression, but the voice was so gentle and kind, Laura wanted to hug her. "It is Laura, right?" the woman asked, clearly uncertain of her name. "Laura Kennedy?" Laura nodded, not sure she could trust her voice. Suddenly the sun went behind a cloud, and the woman's face came into focus. Laura's breath caught. "Oh my God," she thought. "I can't believe she even knows my name." Laura was looking into the stunning face of the person who was once the most popular girl in high school, and who Laura always wished she could be. She was looking at Jackie Scott. Darkness Remains, sequel to Darkness Falls. Written by K.C. Luck. Narrated by Violet Dixon.
You have been listening to Book Clips. Check out the show notes for the synopsis and buy links for this book. If you are interested in showcasing your novel, then check out the show notes for more information.